So there's a common misconception that goes writers suffer for their art, right? The truth of the matter is creative output is directly influenced by the amount of energy that you have in your body. Mind, body go together in synergy. This is what I've always been talking about on this podcast. Welcome to the Creative Cynergy Show, where we're talking mind, body wellness for writers and creative professionals. I'm your host, Coach Cyn, and I will be your guide on your wellness journey. And today we're talking about exactly why wellness writers for writers and how it directly impacts your creative output. So there's a common misconception that goes writers suffer for their art, right? We're always portrayed in movies and TV shows as the tortured artist who eventually becomes a drunk for some reason and is always disheveled because they're so involved in the artistic process. The truth of the matter is creative output is directly influenced by the amount of energy that you have in your body. Mind, body go together in synergy. This is what I've always been talking about on this podcast. Where your mind goes, energy flows, and vice versa. So where energy flows, your mind gets more creative. So when one is not in tune with the other, then your creative output begins to suffer. But that's not to be saying that writers suffer for their art. No, it's actually reverse. It's your art suffers when you are not at your best level. So what we want to do in this particular podcast episode and going forward is to get you to a place where you are in tune with your wellness so that your writing is your best effort. This is why I always say that we're making you healthier and more creatively productive, because the two go hand in hand in synergy. Consider this your wake-up call. Your mind and body are your greatest tools, especially when they work together. But when they're out of sync, your creativity suffers. All of this is to say that the consequences of sitting too long without embracing your wellness and trying to optimize it are very, very real. For me, the reason that I started on this road with this podcast was the tight hips angle. Now, I used to have a structured 9-to-5 where I would sit in front of a computer going on 9 hours a day. And then I would come home and do more work because I was working on my own thing. Well, all of that time sitting in a chair, eventually you lose steam throughout the day and you are not structured in the proper posture. So it really starts to affect your hips, which throws out your lower back, and it travels all the way up into your neck and your head. And it's a chain reaction of things that can really lead to long-term problems if not corrected. So your creativity is at risk when your physical health, mental clarity, and creative flow are off. We talked a little bit about the physical impact of, sitting in a chair all day and doing your writing, but there's also the other components to it. And so let's talk a little bit about the mental fog, the brain fog that can happen when your batteries are drained and you're not as focused as you should be on your creative task. Now, brain fog will contribute to poor creativity, where the words dry up and it feels like an absolute struggle to write even the simplest of scenes. But it's not just the mental and physical aspects of being a writer that we should talk about here. There are also an emotional toll that it takes to actually put yourself in your story and your words on paper. And it's an underlying thing that a lot of people are not going to be able to relate to unless you actually are a writer. Because when we write, we're putting pieces of ourselves into the story, or something that we've experienced along the way. That is how the words jump off the page, is because we're basically bleeding on the page, is what I say. And that's why I have this tattoo of a quill with instead of ink, it's blood, because essentially we're bleeding on the page and we're putting our whole entire selves into this. So essentially, there's that emotional toll as well. Sometimes we answer to our readers and those deadlines creep up, and we don't want to disappoint readers. So it becomes somewhat of a heavy burden. The other thing that writers, especially new writers, run into and on an emotional level is this thing called imposter syndrome, which I can't stand that label because an imposter means you're false. Imposter means you're not true. But if you are writing and you are putting the truth of your story down on a page, how can you call yourself an imposter? But too many people, like I said, especially younger new writers, they do this thing where they compare, and they compare themselves to people who are established already. And that's where the imposter thing comes in, because they feel like a fraud. But you should know that's not what it is. That's not what you should be calling yourselves. It's self-doubt is all it is. And it's the negative part of our brains that tell us that we aren't good enough. But it doesn't mean that you're an imposter by any means, because you're doing the damn thing. But that's not to say that this is not a real thing that happens, because it does happen. And more often than not, that leads straight into burnout. So to sum up, the reason why wellness matters for writers and other creatives is because, like I said, where the mind goes, energy flows. And having proper wellness will fuel that creative flow. So the solution to establishing proper writer wellness comes by focusing on the 4 pillars of writing, like I said: physical, mental, emotional, and creative. That comes from daily actionable tips. It doesn't have to be an entire lifestyle overhaul, just small habits that create a big impact. And you're going to start small, but you're going to build momentum over time so that you find your sustainable level and you don't experience the pain or the impeded process that poor writer wellness will eventually bring an impact on you. So the way that you can start right now, and I implore you to do this, you're going to break the sit cycle. So every 30 to 60 minutes, when you've been sitting in a chair for too long, stand up, stretch, take a big inhale and exhale, and breathe. Take a minute and try it right now. Doesn't that feel better? When you start to move your body, and especially with the stretching, the blood starts to flow and it gets into you. Let's call it the nooks and crannies of your brain, because if you're sitting and it becomes stagnant, then the juices aren't flowing. Even though you think you're in flow, you're probably not. So stand up, stretch. Mobility matters. And I'm going to discuss this in greater depth later on in some other episodes. But like I was saying about my hips before, it took me a long time to get those fluid again. Don't let that happen to you, especially you younger writers. Get up off your ass and move. One of the things I really want to touch on that a lot of people don't really focus on is to protect your eyes. The fact that we look at screens for the majority of the day can really negatively impact our eye structure. And over time, it could honestly deteriorate our sight. Every 20 minutes, you're going to look 20 feet away for 20 seconds. This will help the eyes maintain moisture and focus. Speaking of focus, take the time to help yourself to relax. And I'll have another video linked in the description on the ways that you can implement stress relief techniques and self-care so that you can maintain your focus and your flow. So to sum up, why writer wellness matters is because your mind and your body are not separate from your art, and they're not separate from each other. They are your art. And when they work in synergy, they produce better results. And when you start to implement some of these tips and tricks into your daily routine, you're going to find it improves not only your productivity, but whole body health as well. But most importantly, when you protect your wellness, it fuels your creativity and it leads to better work. And really, isn't that what it's all about? The two go hand in hand. That's why it's mind, body, wellness, and synergy. Now, we'll see you next time. Make sure you subscribe and share the link around, because a lot of the writers that I know have missed the message, and they're still suffering for their art. Don't let the writer in your life suffer. Send them this video today and get them on the right track so that they produce their best work while they still can. So show's over, Cynergy.